a millionaire asked his assistant to have a child with him. When the baby was born, one look left him stunned by an unexpected truth. Ronald Richmond stood by his office window, watching the sun dip below the city skyline, casting long shadows over the towering buildings. The view was impressive, but he barely noticed it, lost in his thoughts. On his desk, his father's will sat, a persistent reminder of the heavy responsibility he carried. He'd read through it so often he could practically recite it from memory. Control of the Richmond Empire will be granted to the first direct heir. If none of my children leaves a legitimate descendant, the inheritance will be divided among the shareholders. With a frustrated exhale, he closed the document. He had poured his entire life into this empire, striving for perfection with every choice he made. But all his dedication would be worthless if he didn't produce an heir. To his father, family wasn't just about connection. It was a source of influence and authority. Now that same pressure weighed on him. Ronald had attempted to find love, yet his relationships never lasted. Women would drift away when they saw how cold and controlled his life had become, with his relentless work ethic and inability to unwind. At 40, he was alone, feeling the pressure of time ticking down. The city lights were beginning to glow in the fading daylight, and Ronald recalled his sister Brenda's words. She'd made no secret of her ambition to claim the empire if he failed to produce an heir. For years, Brenda had resented living in his shadow, viewing the family fortune as her gateway to validation and power. Since their father's passing, the rivalry between them has only deepened. Ronald knew she'd go to great lengths to claim everything for herself. Time was running out, and with each passing day, his chances dwindled. He needed a strategy. The following morning, Linda Brooks entered his office, a folder tucked under her arm. She'd been by his side for years, her loyalty and competence unwavering. Her appearance was always neat and professional, and her calmness a welcome contrast to the fast-paced environment around them. She set the documents on his desk without a word, as she always did. "Here are the financial reports you requested, Mr. Richmond," she said with her usual steady tone. Ronald nodded, his gaze still fixed on the window, lost in thought. Linda had always been the one constant in his life, who never let him down. They weren't friends, and their connection didn't extend much beyond the office. But what Ronald had discovered in her was even rarer than friendship. He had found someone he could truly trust. What Ronald didn't realize was that beneath her composed surface, Linda was bearing the weight of her own personal turmoil, something she fought hard to keep hidden. That night, when Linda returned to her modest apartment, she found her husband, Brian, lying on the couch. His face was pale, eyes dim, the sickness taking its toll on him. She knelt by his side, brushing his forehead gently. "How are you feeling today?" she whispered softly. Brian managed a weak smile. "You don't have to keep this up, Em. We both know we can't afford more treatments." Linda bit her lip, fighting the flood of worry rising inside her. Medical bills were stacking up, and their resources were nearly exhausted. She knew their time was limited, and every day without a solution felt like a weight she couldn't bear. "It's going to be all right," she murmured, but even she struggled to believe it. She stayed with him until he drifted off to sleep, watching the struggle in each breath he took. Desperation was creeping into every part of her life, and the need to find a way out grew more urgent by the day. Meanwhile, back in his office, Ronald was wrestling with his own burdens, the pressures of his legacy, and the need to act quickly. He had considered several paths, but none seemed right until a new thought crossed his mind. Linda. The reasoning made sense. She was already someone he trusted, someone who understood his world and wasn't prone to unnecessary emotions. It would be straightforward, practical, just like every other part of his life. For the first time in a while, Ronald felt like he had a handle on things. His idea to involve Linda could be exactly what he needed. Meanwhile, As Linda rested on her couch, her phone lit up with a call. It was Ronald. She picked up to hear his deep, no-nonsense voice on the line. "Linda, I need you to come by my office tomorrow morning. There's something important to discuss." Her heart skipped a beat. She had worked with Ronald for years, but there was a firmness in his tone that unsettled her. What could be so urgent? She ended the call, a swirl of nerves and curiosity growing within her. Whatever Ronald had to say, she knew it wouldn't be minor. They were on the brink of a day that would change everything, and neither could foresee the impact that choice would bring. Linda went to bed that night, completely unaware of the life-altering proposal she would receive the next day. It would test her values in ways she never anticipated. Early the following morning, she arrived on time at Ronald's office, noticing the air felt unusually tense. Ronald's expression was more intense than she'd ever seen before. Standing by the window, Ronald was still, hands clasped behind him, gazing out. "Take a seat, Linda," he said, not looking away from the view. Linda obeyed, feeling an uneasy tension settle over her. She sensed something major was about to unfold, but had no clue what it could be. Ronald turned to face her, his eyes steely and calculating, yet there was a barely there vulnerability in his gaze. He hesitated, as though weighing every word with care. "I'll be straightforward, Linda. I want you to have a child for me." The silence that followed was nearly overwhelming. Linda looked at him, convinced she'd misheard. Her mind spun, struggling to make sense of it all. It had to be a bad joke. "Excuse me," she murmured, hoping he would clarify. "I realize it's a strange proposal, but I need an heir. I don't have time for complicated relationships, and you're the only one I trust to handle this with professionalism and discretion." Linda felt the air leave her lungs. The way Ronald spoke, it was impossible to believe he was kidding. Ronald sat down across from her, explaining in his usual calm, collected tone. It would be strictly business, a contract with no emotional involvement or personal expectations. Insemination would ensure minimal complications, and she would be financially compensated, enough to eliminate any financial stress she might have. A lump formed in her throat. The mention of money hit her hard, reminding her of Brian and the pile of medical bills cluttering her kitchen. She tried to respond. "Ronald," but her voice faltered. "I don't expect you to decide now," he said, his tone unwavering, as if he hadn't noticed her turmoil. "Just take some time to think it over." "I realize this might come off as unfeeling," he began, his tone sharp, each word delivered as if closing a high-stakes business deal. Linda stared back, a mixture of disbelief and hurt clear in her gaze. The man across from her, speaking with such detached calculation, was handling human life like just another transaction. After the meeting, Linda left the office feeling as though the floor beneath her had crumbled. She found the nearest restroom, closed herself inside, and pressed her forehead against the cool surface of the mirror, her mind a whirlwind. Ronald's offer was outlandish and heartless, yet it was also her only remaining hope for Brian's survival. The moral conflict felt suffocating. Could she really bring a child into this world through such a cold arrangement, one lacking warmth and genuine care? And how would her marriage survive if Brian ever found out the truth? She stayed in that bathroom, taking slow, deep breaths, fighting to regain control over the flood of emotions, but the reality was undeniable. With every day that passed, Brian's condition worsened, and her options to save him were rapidly fading. That night, while she cooked dinner in their small apartment, Linda tried to mask her fear from Brian, who, though visibly exhausted, managed to smile faintly for her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes, though weary, attentive. "Yeah, it's just been a long day," she replied, forcing a smile. She knew she couldn't reveal the truth. Not yet. Considering Ronald's offer was agonizing, but turning it down would mean letting go of Brian sooner. As they ate in silence, Linda felt despair rise within her. She was running out of time to decide. Later, lying beside Brian, sleep eluded her. She stared at the ceiling, her thoughts tangled in an endless loop. She knew that if she said yes, she'd lose a piece of herself. Yet, it would offer Brian a shot at life. She turned toward him, watching his face in the soft light, wondering how many moments they had left. Silent tears traced down her cheeks. There was no painless path, and either choice would leave her wounded. At last, she shut her eyes, knowing tomorrow she would have to face Ronald with an answer. Whatever decision she made would alter her life's direction forever. When the first rays of morning light streamed in, Linda was ready. She had made up her mind, despite every part of her wishing she didn't have to. As she got ready to head to the office, Linda's phone buzzed with a message from Ronald. "Have you made a decision?" Her pulse quickened as she read it, knowing that stepping into that office would set her life on an unchangeable path. Arriving that morning, each step toward Ronald's office felt like moving closer to a cliff's edge. The proposal's words still played in her mind, cold and businesslike. The door was slightly open, and as she entered, she saw Ronald seated behind his large desk, his expression giving away that he likely knew her answer already. She took a seat across from him, her hands clasped tightly to hide the slight shake in her fingers. Ronald's calm gaze never wavered, waiting for her to speak first. "I've made a decision," she said, drawing in a deep breath. "I accept." Ronald gave a faint nod, showing just a trace of approval, as if everything was going exactly as planned. He pulled out a black folder, placing it before her, outlining the agreement's terms, conditions of the pregnancy, financial arrangements, and confidentiality clauses. "It's all here," he said, sliding the folder toward her. "Read it carefully before signing." Linda scanned the document briefly before reaching for the pen. She couldn't afford to hesitate. Brian's future depended on this. With a steady hand, she signed her name on each page, feeling a heavy burden lift from her shoulders. Ronald then covered the practical details. The insemination would occur at a private clinic. She'd receive top medical care during pregnancy, and the compensation would handle Brian's treatments and any other expenses. "Understand this, Linda," Ronald said, closing the folder. "I won't be involved in your personal life, nor do I expect you in mine. This is purely professional." She nodded slowly, though deep down, she sensed the line between business and personal was dangerously thin. Later that evening, back at her apartment, she faced the start of many difficult deceptions. Brian looked at her from the couch, his tired smile still capable of tugging at her heart. "How was work today?" he asked, as she helped him settle in. "Busy, like always," she replied, avoiding his eyes. Each word she uttered added to the weight on her conscience, yet Linda knew revealing the truth wasn't an option. Not now. Brian was already overwhelmed with his illness, and he didn't need the added burden of knowing about the sacrifices she was quietly making on his behalf. The next few days breezed by. Ronald and Linda went to the clinic for the initial appointment, where everything proceeded smoothly, just as planned. Initially, Ronald kept things strictly professional, but his demeanor shifted slightly over time. His presence at each appointment wasn't just out of obligation. He seemed genuinely invested in ensuring everything went smoothly. "How are you feeling?" he asked during their first follow-up. Linda was caught off guard. It was the first time he'd inquired with such personal concern. "I'm all right, I think," she replied, trying to keep her tone neutral. Yet that small exchange marked the first sign that their arrangement was turning into something more nuanced than either had anticipated. As the weeks passed, Linda felt the weight of her choice press harder on her heart. Every glance at Brian amplified her guilt. She kept reminding herself it was all for him, but that reassurance was beginning to wane. Meanwhile, Ronald's once cool demeanor began to soften. Their brief chats grew longer, and though they more sinichoso disassociable, they both tried to maintain a professional boundary. A natural connection started forming. After one checkup, Ronald surprised her by walking her to her car. Just before she got in, he placed a hand on her shoulder and said quietly, "Thank you for doing this." The simplicity and sincerity of his words caught her off guard, shaking her usual reserve. For a fleeting moment, Linda saw a different side of Ronald, not the powerful, relentless businessman, but someone carrying a weight only a few could comprehend. Returning home that evening, Linda felt her life quietly unraveling. She realized the path she was on was fraught with risks, not just to her marriage, but to her heart as well. What once felt like a straightforward arrangement was becoming more complicated than either of them had expected. That night, as Brian slept beside her, Linda lay wide awake, staring into the dark, wrestling with how much longer she could juggle these two worlds. And within her, an uneasy question stirred. What if this isn't just a deal? What if I'm beginning to feel something deeper for Ronald? The weeks continued, and with them came the early symptoms of pregnancy, morning sickness, subtle signs of a new life taking shape. Linda couldn't ignore the unexpected connection she felt to the child growing within her. She tried to push aside the implications, but her body reminded her every day of the life she now carried. Ronald himself started changing too, though in a quieter, more understated way. Initially, he thought he could keep his emotions at arm's length after the agreement. But as he went along with Linda to her medical appointments, something began to shift inside him. The baby's steady heartbeat, each ultrasound image, seemed to chip away at his walls. One day, while they sat in the clinic's waiting area, Linda caught him gazing at her. The usual coolness in his eyes had softened, replaced by a hint of curiosity, maybe even something deeper he didn't yet understand. "What?" Linda asked, noticing his stare. Ronald shook his head lightly. "Nothing. Just thinking about how amazing this all is." Linda felt a slight chill. This was the first time Ronald showed a flicker of real emotion, a small glimpse of the man beneath the businessman. A few days later, Ronald surprised Linda by saying he wanted to be more involved in preparing for the baby's arrival. He took her to a baby furniture store, something she never expected. She assumed he'd assign these tasks to someone else. Yet, Ronald appeared set on handling every little detail himself. Walking through the cribs and toys, Linda watched him with a growing sense of wonder. The once calculating man was now inspecting a crib mobile with a thoughtful look, deciding if it would be right for the nursery. "I never thought you'd be interested in these kinds of things," Linda said casually. Ronald smirked faintly. "It's my first time doing this. I want to get it right." That simple statement struck Linda on a deep level. Maybe behind his distant demeanor, Ronald craved more than he realized. Meanwhile, her relationship with Brian was beginning to unravel. The clinic visits, her meetings with Ronald, and the secrets she kept were all gradually wearing down her marriage. Brian sensed a shift in Linda, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. "You seem different, Em," he commented one night as she helped him get ready for bed. "Is there something you're keeping from me?" Linda quickly shook her head, avoiding his gaze. "Just work," she answered, her voice unsteady. "It's been a lot lately." Brian sighed, clearly not convinced. His sadness was like a weight on her heart. But Linda knew she couldn't tell him everything. Not yet. The time she had left with Brian was precious, and she didn't want to ruin it. One afternoon, after a routine checkup, Ronald invited Linda out for coffee at a nearby cafe. Though she hesitated, she eventually agreed. Sitting with him in such a casual setting felt strange, almost surreal. "Did you ever picture life turning out like this?" Ronald asked, stirring his coffee. Linda let out a small, bitter laugh. "Definitely not," she replied. "But I guess we don't get to plan everything." Ronald looked at her thoughtfully, as if her words struck a chord. "What about you?" she asked, curious. "Did you ever think about having kids before this?" Ronald paused, fiddling with his spoon. "No. I always thought I didn't have time for that. But now, I'm not sure. Something feels different." This honesty surprised both of them. For the first time, Ronald admitted that he was starting to see the pregnancy as more than just a responsibility. And Linda, despite herself, felt an unexpected connection to him. The next day, Ronald did something unexpected. Without telling Linda, he arranged for a specialist to come to their apartment to check on Brian. The gesture shocked Linda and moved her deeply. She knew Ronald didn't have to go out of his way like that. But he did. When Brian asked how she'd managed to get such an expensive doctor to come, Linda simply said, "A friend wanted to help." Brian offered a faint smile, grateful. But inside, Linda felt her work and personal life beginning to merge in ways she hadn't foreseen. That night, lying next to Brian, she felt her world dividing into two. On one side was the life she'd built with Brian, the man she'd loved for so long. On the other, a connection was growing with Ronald, the man who had altered the course of her future. She stared at the ceiling, realizing that things were only going to get more complicated from here. The feelings Linda had long pushed down were bubbling to the surface, making her interactions with Ronald more tangled with each day. Closing her eyes, she sensed she was caught in an emotional maze, one she might never break free from. Meanwhile, as the bond between her and Ronald gradually deepened, Brenda Watkins observed her brother quietly from the sidelines. Brenda had always believed their father's favoritism toward Ronald had stolen her own chances. She couldn't accept the idea of Ronald securing his legacy with a potential heir due to her ambition. Lately, she'd begun noticing subtle shifts in her brother's routine. Linda, his dependable assistant, was spending more time with him outside of their typical work schedule. That unusual closeness raised Brenda's suspicion that something significant was taking place. With a resolve to unearth the truth, Brenda put her own plan into motion. Her aim was clear. If she could undermine Ronald's reputation before the child was born, she might seize her own opportunity to control the Richmond legacy. Seeking out partners, she approached Billy Hughes, a driven young man intent on climbing the corporate ladder swiftly. Billy, having observed from the fringes for a while, was just waiting for a chance to make his mark. The promise of influence and wealth Brenda offered was too enticing for him to resist. "Stay alert," she said, during their first covert meeting. "I want every detail on Ronald's actions, every encounter he has with Linda. Something's unfolding, and we're going to find out what." Billy agreed without hesitation. He knew supporting Brenda was a risk, but it was also his ticket into the most powerful circles. So he began closely watching Ronald and Linda's every step, tracking the documents Linda handled and seeking any signs to back his suspicions. It didn't take long for him to notice that many of Ronald and Linda's meetings were off the official company schedule. Additionally, their visits to private clinics and medical consultations caught his attention. Billy meticulously gathered every piece of information, aware that knowledge was key. Brenda reminded him to remain discreet in all he did. Brenda knew she needed solid evidence before striking her final blow. Mere suspicion wouldn't be enough to bring down her brother. She needed undeniable proof that could erupt into scandal. With connections in the media, she quietly circulated whispers about Ronald and an alleged affair with his assistant. The rumors filtered into elite circles, where every passing comment could become a powerful tool. Ronald's reputation started to falter, and he took notice. While he kept a composed front, he could feel the pressure mounting. Logan Butler, Ronald's close friend and trusted attorney, sensed trouble on the horizon. Knowing Brenda's resolve, he recognized the signs of her determined efforts to ruin her brother. In a private conversation, he pulled Ronald aside to issue a warning. "Something's not right, Ronald. I've been hearing things. Brenda's stirring up trouble, and I wouldn't be shocked if she's behind these rumors." Though Ronald had always been wary of his sister, this time he sensed a real threat. He couldn't let a scandal impact his business, especially with an heir on the way. "I'll take care of it," he replied coolly, but a flicker of doubt lingered. Brenda was relentless, and this time she wouldn't back down easily. As Brenda and Billy sharpened their plan to destroy him, Ronald's bond with Linda only grew stronger. Unbeknownst to them, Brenda's gaze was fixed on their every move, and time was running out. In the days that followed, tensions simmered, with the looming possibility that their carefully guarded secrets could surface in the most damaging way. As days flew by, Linda found herself living two drastically different lives. In one, she was the devoted wife, supporting Brian as he continued his battle with illness. In the other, her connection with Ronald grew deeper than she had ever anticipated. Medical appointments, baby preparations, and heartfelt conversations with Ronald became part of her routine, pulling her further into his world. But each time she returned home, the guilt weighed heavier on her heart. Brian didn't deserve the deception Linda was keeping from him, yet she couldn't bring herself to stop the spiral of secrets she'd begun. He could sense the shift. Every late arrival, every sidestep around his questions only widened the growing gap between them. "Linda, I know something's going on," he said one evening, his voice barely above a whisper. She avoided his gaze, muttering, "I'm just tired, Brian. It's been overwhelming." But they both understood that her answer was more than just a simple excuse. As her relationship with Brian frayed, her connection with Ronald continued to deepen. Though they tried to keep things strictly professional, the lines were beginning to blur. During one of her doctor's visits, Ronald offered to give her a ride home. Their conversation drifted beyond pregnancy updates. "I never thought things would get this complicated," Linda admitted, staring out the window. Ronald, more open than usual, replied, "Me neither." In that moment of honesty, a new closeness blossomed between them, a quiet understanding that brought them together in an unexpected way. One night, Brian, worn down by suspicion and hurt, couldn't hold back any longer. "Linda, please, just tell me the truth. Is there something you're not telling me?" She sat frozen, unable to meet his eyes. She knew she'd reached the edge of her lies and that the truth would devastate him. "Brian, I don't want to lose you," she whispered, fighting back tears. "Then don't lie to me," he replied, his voice cracking. "Whatever it is, I need to know." Linda felt her heart break into pieces. She couldn't tell him, not now, not when every day with him felt so fragile. That confrontation forced her to question everything she had done. What had once seemed like a logical decision now felt like a burden that threatened to unravel everything she cared about. Meanwhile, Ronald also felt the toll the pregnancy was taking. Though he tried to keep his distance, he found himself increasingly drawn into Linda's life, feeling more excitement about the baby than he had expected. Without realizing it, he began to imagine the life he could have, a family he'd never dreamed of. Unbeknownst to them, Brenda and Billy were quietly watching, piecing together the hidden truth. Billy had gathered enough evidence to see there was more to the relationship between Ronald and Linda than met the eye. The frequent doctor visits and the pregnancy weren't just by chance. "It's only a matter of time before we get what we need," Billy assured Brenda. She gave a chilling smile, knowing that each day brought her closer to seeing her brother's downfall. Soon, she'd have all the evidence required to expose him to the world. That night, as Linda tried to drift off, the weight of her choices felt almost unbearable. She sensed she was on the verge of losing everything that mattered to her: Brian, her self-respect, and the fragile stability she clung to. And as much as Ronald's closeness grew, it stirred both comfort and fear in her. Meanwhile, across town, Brenda and Billy were putting the final touches on their plan to bring the truth to light. A storm was looming, one that promised to change everything once unleashed. The day of the first ultrasound came with an air of anticipation. In the softly lit clinic room, Linda and Ronald sat, waiting to see the baby's first image on the screen. Linda fought to steady her emotions while Ronald sat in silence, hands clasped on his lap. The gentle rhythmic pulse of the heartbeat filled the room, like a delicate but powerful drumbeat. Linda's eyes brimmed with tears at the sound. In that moment, she glanced at Ronald, who also seemed moved. For a man who rarely showed vulnerability, Ronald pressed his lips tightly together, visibly affected. That heartbeat had a way of grounding him, something he hadn't foreseen. Briefly, he wasn't the composed businessman, but someone allowing himself to feel. This heartbeat signified more than just his legacy. It was the promise of a future he'd never dared imagine. "It's remarkable," he muttered, almost under his breath. Linda looked over, surprised. That small moment revealed the subtle shift taking place between them. What had begun as a cold, calculated agreement was taking on a warmth and humanity neither of them had expected. Unexpectedly, Ronald found himself caring for Linda in ways that went beyond what he'd expected. One day, he surprised her with flowers at a checkup, shrugging it off as a silly gesture. But somehow, it felt right. Linda couldn't help but smile at the unexpected kindness. These small moments only made things more confusing for Linda. She knew it wasn't wise to get her hopes up, yet the shift she saw in Ronald was hard to ignore. "I didn't realize you had this side to you," she teased as they sipped coffee after her appointment. Ronald raised an eyebrow, his gaze focused on his coffee. "Maybe I didn't know either." Linda felt a pang of unease in her stomach. It was clear they were treading on delicate ground, but Linda couldn't help feeling a growing closeness with him. Meanwhile, at home, Brian began to sense the gap widening between him and Linda. Though she did her best to stay involved, the bond between them seemed to weaken. Linda's absences grew more frequent, her reasons more unclear. One evening, Brian, his voice weakened by illness, yet tinged with concern, asked, "Are you sure everything's all right?" She hesitated, avoiding his gaze. "Yes, of course, it's just work." Brian nodded, but his face betrayed a hint of doubt. He sensed things had changed, yet he lacked the strength to press further. During one of their quiet talks, Ronald and Linda found themselves discussing potential names for the baby. It was an ordinary topic, yet it carried unexpected weight. "Have you thought of any names?" Ronald asked, as they flipped through a catalogue of baby room decor together. "I'm not sure," she replied, smiling a little. "Do you have any ideas?" Ronald paused, thoughtful, before saying with a touch of nostalgia, "My mom always wanted me to name my son Christian." Linda shivered at his words, surprised. She'd never heard Ronald mention his mother before. It felt like a wall between them was slowly lowering, and that realization left her feeling vulnerable. As Linda and Ronald grew closer without intending to, Brenda and Billy continued their own investigation, gathering enough proof to reveal that Linda's pregnancy was part of an arrangement with Ronald. Brenda understood that releasing the news at just the right moment could ignite a huge scandal, one that would be unstoppable once the baby arrived. "We need to act now, before it's too late," she remarked with a sly grin. Billy gave a quick nod. He was fully aware that Ronald's inevitable fall would open the door for his own advancement. That night, as Linda got ready for bed, her emotions surged. She felt torn between two lives, one with Brian, which was gradually unraveling, and her deepening bond with Ronald. which grew more intense by the day. She lay down next to Brian, yet her thoughts wandered elsewhere. In a quiet corner of her heart, a daunting question began to surface. Could she actually be falling for Ronald? Meanwhile, across town, Brenda and Billy were putting the finishing touches on their scheme. The truth was edging closer to exposure, and when it emerged, everything would be changed. Brenda's plan was nearly ready for launch. In her posh office, alongside Billy Hughes, she meticulously reviewed every detail. Together, they had pieced together enough evidence to make the public question whether Linda's baby was truly born out of love, or merely a covert agreement between Ronald and his assistant. "It's simple," Brenda said, pouring 2 glasses of wine. "If we leak this story now, before the baby arrives, Ronald's reputation will be in ruins." Billy's smile was one of pure complicity. The downfall of Ronald Richmond would be the perfect opening for Billy to climb the corporate ladder. Brenda, however, had even larger aspirations. She wanted her brother destroyed and to seize control of the Richmond empire herself. As Brenda and Billy prepared their attack, Linda remained locked in her own whirlwind of emotions. Guilt and regret gnawed at her for keeping secrets from Brian, and the strain in their marriage had become unbearable. "Linda, you're different lately," Brian said one night, his voice heavy with fatigue. "If there's something you're hiding, I need to know." Linda felt the sting of tears, but she held them back. She knew that confessing would only add to his pain, yet carrying the secret felt like an ever-growing weight pressing down on her. "I'm doing my best," she murmured, unable to offer him anything more. The silence between them grew dense, and the distance threatened to shatter what little was left of their relationship. Meanwhile, Ronald was going through an unexpected transformation. Linda's pregnancy didn't just give him a fresh outlook on life. It pulled him closer to her in ways he hadn't anticipated. After another doctor's appointment, they took a quiet walk together in a nearby park. They strolled in silence, sharing a wordless connection. Stopping by a small lake as the sun dipped low, Ronald stared out over the water. "I never thought this would make me feel so human," he murmured, his gaze lost in the sunset. Linda looked over, taken aback by his candor. "You're not so different from the rest, Ronald," she replied gently. In that moment, both felt an unspoken shift, a deepening bond they hadn't planned. As Ronald and Linda grew closer, Brenda decided it was time for her first move. Using her contacts in the gossip media, she spread a rumor, painting Ronald in a scandalous light, suggesting he'd struck a deal with his assistant to have a baby. The next day, headlines blared in tabloids, Tycoon Ronald Richmond's scandalous contract baby deal. The story caught fire, spreading online and stirring up a storm of gossip. Ronald found out about the scandal from a worried business partner who called, shaken by the potential fallout. "Is this true, Ronald?" the partner asked, voice tense. "Is any of this real?" Ronald clenched his jaw. He knew Brenda was behind this but had no evidence to confront her with. Linda saw the headlines too, and her world felt like it was crumbling. She realized this was only the start. If Brenda had uncovered part of the arrangement, it wouldn't be long before she dug up the rest. "Ronald, this is just the beginning," Linda said, her voice shaking over the phone as she tried to process the situation. Ronald, doing his best to keep his cool, knew this was about to escalate. "Don't worry, I'll take care of it," he promised, though he wasn't sure how. He understood that time was of the essence to control the fallout, but he also knew the days ahead would be decisive. Brenda wouldn't rest until he was completely ruined. That night, as Linda lay in bed, she felt a storm brewing on the horizon. She sensed her life was teetering on the edge, and before long, choices would need to be made that could shift everything. Across town, Brenda reveled in her first victory, savoring the fallout from her initial strike. The scandal was only the beginning, and with just a little more force, she knew she could dismantle her brother's world for good. Meanwhile, Ronald sat alone in his office, gazing at the ultrasound photo of his unborn child that lay on his desk. He was well aware his life was about to transform entirely, but he was resolved to protect the one thing that was bringing him newfound purpose: the baby he was expecting with Linda. Brian had become gaunt, his skin nearly as pale as marble. Whenever Linda looked at him, she felt as though he was slipping away before her very eyes. The disease was progressing unrestrained, and despite the steep costs, treatments were doing little more than stalling the inevitable. Brian was at his physical and emotional limit, and his condition was an increasing weight on Linda. She tried to be there for him constantly, but her heart was torn between the man she had loved for so long and the child growing inside her, the result of a decision that was proving more complicated than she'd ever foreseen. One afternoon, as she helped him to the couch, Brian looked at her with weary, yet searching eyes. "We don't have much time, do we?" Linda felt a tightness in her throat. She wanted to reassure him, to say it would all turn out fine. But they both understood the harsh truth. She simply nodded, words failing her. Days with Brian became filled with prolonged silences and conversations that barely scratched the surface. Each time he reached out emotionally, she seemed to retreat further, weighed down by guilt and secrets she could barely contain. "Linda, I need you here with me. Not just in the room, but really with me," he whispered one evening, his voice fragile. Linda faced him, feeling the crush of desperation in her chest. How could she explain what she'd done? How could she reveal she carried another man's child to save him? The truth felt unbearable to share. "I'm here, Brian. I am," she whispered, though both knew it wasn't entirely true. In the midst of their turmoil, Brian had a serious relapse one night. Linda awoke to his violent coughing in the other room. She rushed to him, finding him gasping for air, his face glistening with cold sweat. "Brian, hang on!" she cried, dialing emergency services with shaking hands. The seconds felt endless, and by the time paramedics arrived, Brian had lost consciousness. As they lifted him into the ambulance, Linda felt as if her entire world was collapsing beneath her feet. She leaned against the doorway of their small apartment, watching the red and blue lights disappear into the night. Left with no one else to call, Linda found herself dialing Ronald's number from the hospital waiting room. She wasn't expecting him to pick up so quickly, but he did. "Ronald, Brian is in a really bad way. I'm so lost." Linda's voice wavered, and she couldn't stop the tears from falling. "I'm coming," Ronald replied, without a moment's hesitation. When he arrived, he found Linda slumped in one of the chairs, drained. He didn't say a word as he sat beside her, quietly taking her hand and giving her the only comfort he could offer. "You're not facing this alone," he said gently. For the first time in a long while, Linda felt someone steadying her through the heartache. Though they hadn't always been close, Ronald had become her rock when she needed it most. When the doctors finally allowed Linda into the room, she found Brian awake, but painfully frail. He seemed to know the end was near. With a sad smile, he motioned for her to come closer. "I can't keep fighting. I'm ready for peace," he whispered. Linda felt her tears slipping down, unable to hold back. She kneeled beside him, her head resting on his chest, as the love they shared mingled with the pain of saying goodbye. "I love you, Brian. I always will," she murmured, her voice thick with grief. Brian gently touched her hair, and in his final breath, he said, "Live, Em. Please live." That night, Brian's eyes closed for the last time, leaving Linda with an aching void she couldn't ignore. She sat by his side, the weight of her choices pressing down on her. The man she'd given everything for was gone, and now she was left to face an uncertain future with the baby she carried. Outside the room, Ronald waited, not yet knowing that Brian's death was only the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. The secrets and shadows of the past were about to resurface, and the simmering conflict with Brenda was far from over. Under a bleak grey sky, Linda said her final goodbye to Brian in a quiet, private ceremony. Only a handful of close friends attended the funeral, joined by distant relatives. Linda stood quietly by the casket, feeling as though each farewell word echoed the secrets she'd kept all along. Ronald, staying back to avoid unwanted attention, came silently to support her. He didn't have to be there, yet his quiet presence offered Linda the strength she needed during one of the hardest moments in her life. As the final rose petals were placed on the casket, Linda felt she hadn't just lost her husband, she'd lost a part of herself. After the service, Ronald drove Linda back to her apartment. He understood she needed company, but he was also aware his feelings for her were drifting into dangerous territory. "What are you planning to do now?" he asked gently as they settled onto her sofa. Linda shrugged, unable to find an answer. Everything she had built around Brian was gone, leaving only her unborn child and an uncertain future with Ronald. "I'll be here for whatever you need, Linda," Ronald said, watching her with a mix of worry and affection. Linda felt her heart skip. She sensed their connection went deeper than it should, yet she couldn't help but lean on him. Amid her grief, Ronald had become her safe haven. But as Ronald and Linda struggled with their growing bond, Brenda was preparing to strike. Now that whispers of the pregnancy scandal were circulating, she was ready to expose the entire truth. "It's time to bring the deal into the open," Brenda informed Billy. Billy nodded, handing her the documents that outlined the transactions between Ronald and Linda, bank transfers, and confidential medical records. Brenda intended to leak it all to the press, choosing the perfect moment to ensure her brother's reputation would be irreparably damaged. Meanwhile, rumors about the arrangement spread further, shaking confidence within the company and undermining Ronald's authority. Partners began questioning his leadership, and the media pressed him relentlessly for a statement. Under pressure, Ronald started to question his own trust in Linda. Despite wanting to believe her, the rumors sowed doubt. Was she keeping even more from him? To find out, he did something he hadn't foreseen. He secretly ordered a DNA test to confirm the baby was truly his. He couldn't afford any more missteps. If there was betrayal, he needed to know before it was too late. Linda could sense a growing chill in Ronald's presence, an unspoken shift in the way he looked at her, as though doubts weighed silently between them. "Is everything all right, Ronald?" she asked one day, picking up on the tension. "Yeah, I'm just swamped with work at the company," he answered, barely meeting her eyes. Though he brushed it off, Linda knew deep down that something was off, but she didn't have the energy to confront him directly. Emotionally drained, she fought to keep herself together as her reality started to crack. A few days later, Ronald received the results of a DNA test. Holding the envelope in his hands, he felt the ground give way beneath him. The child wasn't his. The revelation struck him hard, a wave of betrayal and disbelief crashing over him. The baby he'd been so thrilled about was actually Brian's. Ronald's fists clenched, anger and hurt twisting inside him. How could he have let this happen? He had trusted too much, let his guard down, and now his world was unraveling. In his office, he stared at the ultrasound of the baby, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. He knew he had to confront Linda, yet he understood that doing so would change everything. Sitting alone with the DNA results, he felt the weight of anger and heartbreak consume him. After a long, heavy silence, he rose with a steely resolve. He couldn't avoid it any longer. Linda owed him an explanation. That evening, he asked Linda to come over, his voice cold and firm. There would be no easy way through this conversation. When Linda arrived, the tension hung thick in the air. She could tell something serious was going on the moment she stepped inside. "Ronald, what's happening?" she asked cautiously, sensing that her secret was out. Ronald tossed the papers onto the table between them. "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" he demanded, his voice strained with anger he'd held back too long. Linda looked at the results, feeling her worst fear come to life. Ronald knew the baby wasn't his. I did it for Brian," she stammered through tears. "I couldn't let him pass without giving him a chance." Her explanation only stoked Ronald's anger, leaving him feeling betrayed by the one person he had truly trusted. "Do you even understand what you've done?" Ronald shouted, his voice tight with anger he could barely control. "This whole thing, the baby, the dream of a family, it was all just a lie." Linda's eyes filled with tears as she struggled to explain. She knew her actions were beyond excuse, yet she'd acted out of a desperate love, trying to keep the man she cared for close. "I didn't want to hurt you, Ronald," she whispered, her voice wavering. "I really didn't." Ronald's gaze held a mixture of anger and deep hurt. Part of him wanted to walk away, to leave her and the child that symbolized everything he'd lost. But another part, a deeper, more vulnerable part, knew it was already too late. As they argued, he couldn't shake the memory of his last conversation with Brian. Before he passed, Brian had asked him to look after Linda and the baby, giving them a chance for a better life. That request echoed in Ronald's mind, making his decision even more painful. "Brian asked me to take care of you both," he murmured, almost to himself. Linda's pained gaze met his, aware that this promise was the single thread holding them together. "I don't expect forgiveness, Ronald. I know this is beyond what anyone should have to bear, but the baby, he's innocent in all of this." Ronald's fists clenched as he wrestled with a flood of conflicting emotions. She was right. The baby was blameless. And even though he wasn't his by-blood, Ronald had come to love the child in ways he hadn't anticipated. The silence between them was heavy, full of unspoken feelings. They both understood they were at a turning point. Ronald could walk away, severing all ties, or stay and accept a role he'd never prepared for. After what felt like an eternity, Ronald finally spoke. "I need time. This is harder than I thought it'd be, but I won't leave you alone in it." Linda nodded, relief flashing in her eyes at the glimmer of hope. While they grappled with the truth and searched for a way forward, Brenda was already making her next move. Determined to ruin her brother, she leaked the results of the DNA test to the media. The scandal hit with the force of a bombshell, with tabloids plastering headlines that branded Ronald a fraud and questioned his capacity to lead his company. Ronald found out through Logan Butler, his friend and attorney, who showed him the inflammatory articles. "We knew this was a risk, but Brenda, she's gone too far this time." Ronald inhaled deeply, feeling the simmering anger rise within him. He had faced too many betrayals over the years, but this time he was determined not to let his sister have the last word. Standing by the window, he gazed out over the city, his resolve hardening. He understood that the next move would shape both the company's destiny and his personal life. Letting Brenda unravel everything he had worked so hard for wasn't an option, nor was abandoning Linda and the baby. Headlines and online news feeds erupted with the scandal. "Business mogul Ronald Richmond betrayed. Baby isn't his," they proclaimed, sending rumors spiraling across social media and stirring unease among the company's partners. Stocks in Richmond Enterprises began a steep descent as investors demanded immediate explanations. Ronald found himself squarely in the storm's eye, with the media pressing for answers and the board doubting his leadership. But even in the chaos, his mind was sharper than ever. Brenda had crossed a line, and it was time she paid the price for every deceit. "We're not backing down," he told Logan Butler, his friend and attorney. "It's time to level the playing field with Brenda." Ronald met Logan at the office to map out their final strategy, They knew that to counter Brenda, they had to bring her own secrets to light. For weeks, Logan had been compiling a file on her shady transactions, her manipulation of the board, and the press leaks she orchestrated. "We've got enough to take her down," Logan said, setting a hefty file on the desk. "But the question is, are you prepared to ruin her reputation publicly? This is more than just a sibling feud." Ronald stared at the file in silence, then nodded firmly. "She left me no choice." As Ronald and Logan prepared their counterstrike, Linda found herself grappling with the fallout from the scandal. The rumors had cast her into an unwelcome spotlight, with harsh comments and relentless scrutiny following her everywhere. Every time she stepped outside, she felt the weight of staring eyes. Ronald was by her side, offering quiet support, yet he knew his presence couldn't shield her from the public's judgment. Linda felt herself nearing her breaking point. "I don't know if I can do this, Ronald," she admitted one evening, tears glistening in her eyes. "I'm not sure I can go on with all of this." Ronald took her hand with a steady grip. "You're not going to face this alone. I'm not about to let Brenda have the last word." On the day of the board meeting, Brenda walked in, exuding confidence as if she'd already claimed victory. But her smug demeanor vanished once Ronald and Logan laid out solid proof of her manipulations and illegal schemes. "Here's all the evidence of Brenda's hidden accounts and her plan to ruin this company," Logan stated, distributing copies to each board member. Brenda went pale, realizing her scheme had unraveled before her eyes. Ronald leaned in close and whispered, "You fought hard, Brenda, but you underestimated just how far I'd go." The board didn't hesitate. Their decision was unanimous. Brenda was stripped of her position and her shares were frozen. In one swift move, Ronald had taken back control of his empire and removed his biggest threat. With Brenda sidelined, Ronald met Linda privately. Amid the upheaval, he felt a new clarity. Life was emptier without her. "I'm not sure how we got here, but I want you in my life, Linda," he admitted, with unguarded honesty. Despite all the scars, Linda recognized a partner in Ronald, with whom she could envision the future. "I don't know what lies ahead, but I want to give it a shot." Ronald took her hand, and in that quiet moment, they both knew the future was uncertain, but they'd face it together as a family. As they shared this private moment, a text lit up Ronald's phone. It was from Logan. "We have an issue." Just hours after the board meeting, Ronald read Logan's message, his pulse quickening. The news was straightforward. Someone was investigating the agreement between him and Linda. But this time, it wasn't just about damaging his reputation. It was about exposing secrets Brenda herself hadn't uncovered. "There's a journalist looking into it," Logan said over the phone. "He's well connected and seems intent on revealing something bigger." A chill shot through Ronald. The past he thought he'd buried was beginning to claw its way to the surface. This fight was far from finished. Ronald realized he needed to move fast to outmaneuver this new threat. He called Logan and the legal team together, urging them to assess the situation and decide their next move. "We can't afford any slip-ups this time. We need to figure out who's pulling the strings here and what they want," Ronald stated firmly. "I won't let anyone tear down what we've worked so hard to rebuild." Logan nodded, his loyalty to his friend stronger than ever. "I'll take the lead on this one," he offered. "If anyone's going to play tough, it'll be us." Meanwhile, Linda sensed the growing stress that began to settle over Ronald again. Though he tried to keep her at a distance to shield her, she couldn't ignore the feeling that he was holding back something important. One evening, while they sat on the sofa, she finally asked, "Ronald, what's really going on?" He looked at her, hesitating, wondering if he should share his fears. After a moment, he chose honesty. "Someone else is digging into the agreement. We don't know who they are or what their goal is, but I'm not about to let them ruin us." Linda's heart tightened with worry. The thought of past secrets coming to light unsettled her deeply. "So what are we going to do?" she asked. Ronald held her hand gently. "We're going to face this together. This time, I won't leave you to handle it alone." As Logan followed the trail of the journalist, he uncovered a disturbing truth. Behind the investigation was a business partner who had once secretly aligned with Brenda. This man, Tyler Wright, had been waiting for the ideal moment to strike. With Brenda out of the picture, Tyler saw his chance to try and seize control. "Tyler's out for more than just a hit to your reputation, Ronald," Logan warned. "He's after your place in the company." Ronald clenched his jaw. He couldn't believe that even with Brenda gone, others were still willing to go to any lengths to bring him down. With Tyler's threat drawing nearer, Ronald and Linda knew they had a tough choice to make. They couldn't keep living in fear that their secrets would be exposed. "We need to tell our side of the story before he gets the chance," Linda suggested, her resolve catching Ronald off guard. "If we're up front, no one can hold it over us." He looked at her with admiration, recognizing the bravery this decision demanded. But he knew she was right. It was the only path forward, free from fear. "We'll face this together," he said, a small, grateful smile forming. This time, they were determined not to let anyone else pull the strings. Ronald and Linda knew that taking control of their story was the only way to secure their future. Their best option was to be open and get out ahead of any attempt Tyler Wright might make to twist the truth. With Logan and the PR team by their side, they carefully crafted each word they'd share with the media. "It won't be easy," Logan cautioned, "but if we're genuine and transparent, people will listen." Linda drew a deep breath, bracing herself. This time, she'd face whatever came her way without turning back. Ronald gave her a look filled with pride and appreciation. Together, they had already overcome so much, and now just one more step lay ahead. The day of the press conference arrived. Reporters packed the room, eager for the first-hand account of the scandal that had captivated everyone. Cameras zoomed in on the couple as Ronald stepped forward. "I know there's been a lot said about us recently," he started, his voice unwavering. "Today, we're here to tell the truth." With a mix of openness and composure, Ronald and Linda shared how their arrangement had come to be, explaining the intentions behind every choice. Ronald acknowledged that his bond with the child and with Linda had grown stronger than he'd ever imagined possible, while Linda acknowledged that a strong desire to protect Brian was what drove her decisions. "This child may not be mine by blood, but I love him as if he were," Ronald declared, glancing at Linda with resolve. "We're building a life together, and we're ready to face whatever challenges come our way." The room fell silent for a few brief seconds. Then the questions started, but the tone had changed. Reporters now saw a story of resilience, sacrifice, and surprising love rather than scandal. Watching the live broadcast, Tyler Wright felt his strategy unraveling. With Ronald's honesty, the controversy he'd hoped to fuel had lost its spark. Left without a scandal, Tyler found himself out of options. "This isn't over," he muttered, though he felt his moment of victory slip away. After the press conference, Ronald and Linda walked out together, hand in hand, meeting the flashes and cameras with unity. The secrets and lies were gone. Both felt an immense relief, knowing that, though the journey had been tough, they could finally move forward, unburdened by the past. "We made it," Linda murmured, her gaze fixed on Ronald, her eyes filled with a blend of relief and anticipation. "Yes, we did," he replied, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "And this is just the beginning." Back at their home, Ronald and Linda felt a peace they hadn't experienced in ages. While the future remained uncertain, for the first time, they both felt prepared to face it together. Ronald rested his hand on Linda's belly, feeling the new life they were creating, and a warm smile crossed his face. "We're going to be a family," he said, his voice filled with hope. Linda nodded, feeling as though they'd finally found their path. Just as they were settling into this newfound calm, Ronald's phone buzzed. It was Logan. "Ronald, we need to talk. There's something else you should know about Tyler," Logan said with a serious tone. Ronald met Logan the following day, his mind racing over the tone of the message. Logan welcomed him into his office, holding a thick folder. "Tyler hasn't given up. I've got solid proof he's still out to bring you down," Logan said, handing over the documents. Inside, Ronald found contracts and deals with suspicious patterns linking back to Tyler. He wasn't just trying to wrestle control of the company. He'd been secretly manipulating assets for years, laying a foundation to seize the Richmond fortune. "This is deeper than we realized," Logan went on. "If we don't stop him now, you could lose everything." Ronald clenched his jaw, realizing the battle was far from over. To stop Tyler, he had to act fast. He couldn't let another crooked move ruin his company. Working with Logan, Ronald laid out a detailed plan to reveal Tyler's shady dealings to the board and financial authorities. This time, they'd make sure there were no loose ends. "We'll present everything at the next board meeting," Ronald decided, "and this time, Tyler won't slip away." Logan nodded, understanding the stakes. "It'll be a decisive move, but we'll need rock-solid evidence. I'm on it." Later, Ronald chose to confide in Linda. He knew honesty was the only way forward after all they'd endured. "Tyler's not done with us," he told her, as they sat together in their living room. Linda felt a chill run through her, but this time she refused to let fear hold her back. "We'll tackle this together," she thought. "We've come too far to back down now." Ronald gazed at her, sensing that, no matter what lay ahead, Linda had become his rock. He gently placed his hand on her belly, feeling the bond with the baby soon to arrive. The fight wasn't over yet, but he knew they wouldn't face it alone. When the day of the board meeting finally came, the room was thick with tension. Tyler strode in, exuding confidence, unaware that Ronald and Logan held everything needed to bring his misdeeds to light. Rising with a folder full of damning evidence, Ronald spoke up. "Tyler Wright has been misappropriating company funds and concealing illegal transactions for years. Here's all the proof." The board members, visibly stunned and outraged, pored over the documents. Though Tyler attempted to defend himself, the truth was already out. His iron grip on the company fell apart in mere minutes. "Tyler, you're no longer welcome here," Ronald declared firmly. "This ends now." As Tyler left, stripped of his power, he faced the cold, unforgiving stares of his former allies. The board voted to expel him on the spot, restoring full control to Ronald. With Tyler gone, Ronald felt a profound sense of relief he hadn't felt in ages. He'd won back the company, but beyond that, he'd gained something far more meaningful. He now had the promise of a real family with Linda and the baby on the way. Later that evening, Ronald lay next to Linda, finally at peace. "We did it," he whispered. Linda smiled, knowing this was only the beginning of a new chapter, and we'll face it together every step of the way. But just as they thought the storm had passed, Linda felt the first stir of contractions. "The baby's coming, Ronald," she said, her eyes filled with both excitement and nerves. Ronald's heart raced. Life was taking another unexpected turn, but he felt ready. Linda's contractions intensified, and they both knew it was time. Ronald, usually composed under pressure, was racing with adrenaline. He grabbed the hospital bag and helped her to the car, trying to mask his nerves. "We'll be okay," he said, reassuring her as he sped toward the hospital. And even through the pain, Linda felt a wave of calm wash over her. All the struggles they'd faced seemed worth it, now that they'd finally reached this moment. Linda felt certain that, no matter what they'd been through, this baby marked the beginning of something truly wonderful. The hours in the hospital dragged on. Ronald stayed right there by her side, holding her hand and refusing to leave, not even for a second. For the first time in ages, his focus wasn't on the company or old family feuds. It was on being fully present as they awaited their child. "I'm right here, Linda. Not going anywhere," he whispered, steadying her as she braved each contraction. After hours of waiting and labor, the sound of their newborn's first cry filled the room. They exchanged looks, drained yet overcome with emotion. As the doctor handed them their baby, Ronald's heart swelled at the sight of the tiny face he held for the first time. "He's perfect," Linda whispered, her eyes glistening with tears. Ronald looked at her, then down at the baby, knowing that at last he found a purpose he'd been searching for all his life. Holding their child close, Ronald turned to Linda, aware that this moment called for something meaningful. "What should we name him?" Linda's smile held the answer she'd long known. "Christian. That was your mother's favorite, wasn't it?" A lump rose in Ronald's throat. The thought of honoring his mother's memory while leaving behind the hardships of the past struck something deep within him. "Christian Richmond," he repeated softly, a genuine smile crossing his face. This name would carry forward a new beginning, symbolizing a future filled with hope. As Linda rested, the baby nestled in her arms, Ronald took a moment to step aside and reflect. From the hospital window, he gazed out over the city that had witnessed both his greatest conflicts and his growth. His mind drifted through his mistakes, betrayals he'd endured, and victories hard won. But all that felt distant now. For the first time, he didn't feel defined by his accomplishments or his family name, but by the love he'd found with Linda and their child. Taking a deep breath, Ronald finally felt at peace. Back at home, Ronald and Linda relaxed together on the couch, with baby Christian sleeping peacefully in their arms. The house, which once felt empty and cold, now radiated with warmth and love. "This is all I need," Ronald murmured, gazing at his family. Linda leaned her head on his shoulder, sharing the same sentiment. Their path had been anything but easy, yet here they were, together, and that was everything. As a quiet peace filled the room, Ronald's phone buzzed with a message from Logan. "All is set for the next phase. The company is completely yours." Ronald switched off his phone, smiling, realizing that, for the first time, he was shaping his future out of love, not just ambition. Ultimately, this story reminds us that life is unpredictable. Mistakes, betrayals, and hardships may line our path, but there's always a chance for redemption. Ronald and Linda discovered that true success isn't measured by wealth or power, but by love, honesty, and building a future as a family. No matter how challenging the past, we can find peace by looking forward and embracing what matters most: family, loyalty, and commitment to those we love. Because in the end, the most meaningful legacy we leave isn't in businesses we build, but in the lives we touch. This is a new beginning for Ronald, Linda, and their child, a testament that there is always room for forgiveness, love, and a fresh start, regardless of the journey's twists and turns. And with that, we conclude today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give us a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our future videos. Share your thoughts in the comments. What message did you take away? We'll see you in the next video. Take care, and remember, there's always a chance to begin anew.